Hey, everybody. I'm Joe Mahaffey, one of the co-hosts of the Lay It on the Table board game podcast. You may have noticed that my co-host, James Englehart, and I have been offline since June of 2024. This has been due to various life events like international travel, work obligations, and, well, aging parents. With this as a backdrop, James and I met recently to discuss the future of the podcast, which will return with new episodes starting this month, January 2025. In our return, we will have some tweaks that we hope will make it easier for us to plan and deliver this podcast on a consistent twice-a-month basis. We look forward to sharing these changes with you in the new year as we continue to share our love of board games with you all. In the meantime, we're happy to share with you this previously unreleased Season 3 final episode, where James and I talked to two of his students from his Spring 2024 May Experience class. Note, one of the students has some audio issues, but it doesn't diminish the listening experience. We hope you enjoy this final episode from Season 3, and James and I will see you in upcoming episodes. And now, here is the final Season 3 episode of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast, with the accent on Southern.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern.
Yes.
I am your host, and I'm getting the words right today for some strange reason, Joe Mahaffey, and it's a pleasure to be here. And of course, as always, my partner in crime and the subject of today's episode,
James Englehart. Joe, thanks that. Yeah. Good to host again. Yeah, we've got my students from the MAX at Furman, a couple of them in a waiting room, ready to talk with us.
well, for those of you who don't, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to bring him in and then I'll do my shtick. Let me
Okay, let's do it, man.
And let's welcome to the show, Ainsley and Katie. They're
Yes.
in the show. All right, ladies, welcome to the program.
Hello.
So,
Hi.
I like to remind our listeners. I like to remind our listeners because they are collectively ours. I should remember these things. That James has a PhD, which doesn't stand for post-hole digger. It isn't truly a doctor of philosophy, and he is a professor of creative writing at Furman University. And if you haven't listened to the episodes previous to this, he has been going through what is known as MAX, or the May Experience, as they say.
Yes.
At Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, next to Travelers Rest, home of the best coffee shop on the planet between Charlotte and Atlanta, the Leopard Forest. And so James has done
Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor. Thank you. I should always put that in there.
Yeah.
But we wanted to talk to James and his students a little bit about the May Experience. So James, why don't you kick us off by telling us what it was your topic was and why you chose these two young ladies to join us this evening.
So it was MAX NXP 213. What games do? I remember writing that on the board on the first day, and everybody's looking at me like, okay. And it ended up turning out pretty well. So yeah, the idea was to think about what tabletop games are, what they do, to explore games that maybe people hadn't or had wanted to try but hadn't had a chance to, and to think about what is a game? What kind of play might they be? What kinds of fun might there be in the world? What kinds of fun might you have while playing games? Is that different from other kinds of fun? How do you teach a game? And then some of the history of RPGs. We had a little RPG week or half week or so, and then thinking about what might be good for mental health and well-being over life, thinking about what tabletop games can do for you there. So we're exploring that. That's a lot to do in basically 3 weeks, 2 full weeks and 2 half weeks. It was a lot. And we were together for 4 hours a day.
Wow.
And which ended up being a lot more time than you would usually spend in class in a semester. But people kept staying anyway because it's games, so yeah.
Well, I'm going to say that's not uncommon for what sometimes it takes to play games.
Yeah, no, and I think we usually got through about at least a game or two so we had 2 hours in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. Sometimes some of the longer games would be most of a session. Sometimes during RPG week, it would drift across lunch. And then talked to a couple of people, but we have Katie and Ainsley. Katie is the incoming treasurer of the D&D club and has a lot of different game experience. And Ainsley and I worked together in the spring semester working on an RPG project that she's bringing together called We Dread Alone, if I
Okay.
remember that right.
Yep.
Oh, good. And I got the little
Yes.
icon thing too. That's awesome. So, yeah. And then we had a couple of other students who couldn't make it for one reason or another. So here we are. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So, I'm curious. I mean, obviously you set the table with both, with Ainsley and Katie, but I'm curious, ladies, what was it that drew you to this particular class?
Ainsley, why don't you kick it
Do you
off?
want to go first?
Yeah.
I'll go first.
Yeah, there you go.
So
So sorry.
I signed up for the class right at the beginning of the spring semester because I knew that Dr. Englehart was teaching it. And I was just starting to work on my game with him. So I was, of course, like very like into the idea of, oh, a MAX, I've never done this before. And it happened to be about, one of my favorite pastimes of all time, playing games. So it was really natural to just kind of sign up for it because, I'm not in school. I work in the evenings. Might as well go play games and get some good grades out of it. And that's how I started. But obviously it's more than that.
Oh, that's awesome. Katie, how about you?
I actually took a game max my freshman year, and I'm just finished my junior year, so year two of this. Um, it was interesting to see games from a different perspective. So I started with a computer science math perspective, and then this was obviously more of a literature narrative. What is the idea behind games rather than the statistics and the mechanics?
Well, that makes a ton of sense. So just out of curiosity, given that you had those two experiences to sort of juxtapose in your brain, what did you get out of this one that you were surprised by, perhaps?
Um, we didn't talk about anything like the magic circle or like how games help you develop. We talked about what are the best strategies to win. And it was just a very different gaming experience. We also only had three people, including the professor, so the game options were limited.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought there were more than that in
No.
Alvin's class. No, wow, that's a little bitty. Yeah.
Well, we all know that the options that you had for this particular class were massive. We all saw the pictures of the games that James was able to, or excuse me, Dr. Englehart was able to get for the class. So that's, and I was really excited for those games because a lot of them are my favorites, and my wife and I, we play a lot of games. So that was really cool. So, Ainsley, how about you? Was there something about, I know you didn't take the earlier class, but was there something about this particular experience that surprised you that you didn't expect to get out of it?
I grew up playing a lot of board games, but as just the same board games over and over and over. So I guess when I started the class, something I was really surprised about was just the variety of board games that there were. I'm by far more of an RPG player than I am like tabletop board games. So it was just really surprising and honestly a lot of fun to get to see the different options for what you can do with the same general format of a game and how different it can be depending on, the aesthetic of the game, the flavoring, the small mechanics of different board games. So I was just really surprised by how much options there were for board games.
Katie, I wrote that one of the things that you sort of dove into was looking at like the way that just even on a low key level, engine building could be different in like the same, like in different games with the same mechanic.
Yeah. I actually had a very similar experience of the variety of games is astounding. So I came in knowing that I enjoyed Wingspan because we played it, and I did not enjoy games like Clue and Monopoly and Sorry, probably because they've been overplayed. They're the games my family owns, and none of them are engine builder. I mean, Wingspan is an engine builder, but I enjoyed it. None of the other games are engine builders, so I found a new favorite genre.
It's funny you say that because we talk a lot about in this podcast about, I feel the same way about those games, by the way. Although my wife does love Clue, and I do have the Critical Role version of Clue over here.
Oh, funny.
but I mean, it was a game she grew up playing, and it's that mystery kind of thing, which fits her persona very much. But I'm the same way about like Monopoly and Sorry and all those, that they were just like the mainstream games, and they just don't really inspire me like this hobby. I was a big fan of Risk when I was a kid and when I was in college and stuff, and I think some of that plays into what we play now. But I haven't really gone back to play Risk. in a hot-
Even Risk is more interesting than some of the other games. It
That
has
is true.
strategy.
Yeah,
There's not really a strategy to Monopoly. There's definitely no strategy to Sorry.
That is correct. Yeah. It's just cards. So
but it's
Joe,
a great
what got you into back into games? What got you into games as a hobby?
me.
Yeah. I
Oh,
like the way
wow.
that his voice like warbled there for a second.
Me? Yeah. No, it was funny. So as I said before we started, my wife and I raised two daughters, and we found ourselves as empty nesters here in Charlotte. And my wife and I had worked with a lot of youth organizations through the years, youth group at our church. Was very involved in a scouting program as a leader. And one of my Eagle Scouts is an artist, and he was doing an art exhibit here in Charlotte, and he did it at a place that would happen to be adjacent to a board game store here in Charlotte called Get Some Game. And we were in there, and I saw for the first time in, I don't know, 30, 40 years, the multi-sided die that you would use in the D&D that we had growing up, because I was there in the early days.
There it is.
Yes, only one. I'll show you what a problem is later. And so that started me back into the idea of exploring Dungeons and Dragons, just to see where it was today. And I didn't realize it that 5e had been out and all that. But then while we were hanging out in a game store in Pineville, Carolina Tabletop Games, also not a sponsor,
Not a sponsor.
I picked up a copy of Wingspan. I judged a book by its cover. And my wife and I learned it, and it became our gateway game. And I think my BGG is over 200 plus games now since 2018. Nowhere close to Dr. Englehart, but closing in.
That is, yeah.
But yeah, no, it was just really my wife and I, my wife and I will be celebrating 33 years at the end of this month.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you. And we found out, a few years back when we were empty nesters that, hey, we still wanted to hang out and play games together.
It's awesome.
So that's kind of how I got back into it. And then just to finish the story for the ladies, I was on a Facebook board about Wingspan, and I made a comment.
Oh, yeah.
James came back at me and said, Joe, is that you? We hadn't talked to each other since I left Wofford in 1989.
Yeah. It's been a minute. Yeah.
We found each other on Facebook in a Wingspan group, and James ended up joining a D&D group that I had going. We were doing it online because of the pandemic. And then we did another.
That was Strahd. So I know both of y'all know Strahd. Yep.
We did the Strahd campaign together, and his daughter joined us for that. And then we started this podcast because, why not? And I think James and I went to Mythicon in Charlotte last November, and that was the first time we physically saw each other since we got out of college.
Yeah, like 30
Corporally
years. Yeah. So
more than you really wanted to know.
So,
about.
And I think
we've all heard that story.
Wingspan was probably, I think that was one of the first games that we played, right? I think.
Day one.
Yeah. Yep. Ainsley, were you on that, or were you on a different game that day?
Oh, I was on a different game. I've actually never played Wingspan before.
Oh, dude. Oh, man. Well, you know where my office is. So that was game one. That was the one person who dropped out of the class was part of that game. And I think it moved. I think he was expecting, I don't know what he was expecting, but sort of faster moving games. And Wingspan was a little too thinky and a little too slow. And he was like, yeah, I'm out. And I saw him later, and he was like, oh, Dr. Engel, I'm sorry. It's like, no, it's good to know. As I think I've told you all, it's good to know in the first 2 hours of a class that it's not for you. Like, bail.
Yeah, that's fair.
Good call. Yeah. So, and I don't think did we ever come back to Wingspan?
No.
I don't think we did.
There were too many other games I hadn't played.
Yeah.
So, well, with that as a backdrop, though, because I saw the games, and I know you were talking just a moment ago about the the appeal of the engine building. Were there any games that you experienced that you realized, okay, the mechanic is the same, sort of the strategy is the same, but the way that it has been skinned to tell a story is different? Did you guys experience that at all?
Yes, but not in class.
Okay.
Um,
Tell me
I
more.
later got Calico, also known as Cats
Yep.
and Quilts, on Steam,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
but didn't get the physical game. I got the Steam version I could play by myself because I'm not in class anymore. I don't have people to play with. And it's a very similar game, kind of. You have to balance what you take, so
Mhm.
you can always afford to put anything down in Calico, but if you want to fulfill your objectives and get the points for having the same colors, etc., you have to be careful and picky about what you choose.
Calico is a great game. It's one of our favorites. One of the
It's
very
really
Oh, yeah.
pretty.
It
nice
is.
Beth Sobel art, AEG. Good stuff. Yeah.
Yep. I like Cascadia is a little less. Cascadia is much easier at the end of a night after you put the toddler to bed and you don't feel like trying to crank through all of the options of Calico. A little more relaxing. But yeah.
Well, my oldest daughter is cat obsessed, and her
Ah,
cat has his own Instagram. So that's one of the games we can get her to play when she's here visiting with us.
it is true.
Yeah.
No, I mean we've got a lot of cat themed games. We have the feral cats on the back. No, the cats are definitely a
So
theme around
how many
here.
students were in the class?
Well, there were 9 of y'all, and then me, and frequently we had at any particular half day 1 or 2 people. There was the one day where we had a bunch of people out. After I think the day after a storm, we had a bunch of people who were out, and so I think that was the day we got to play Ave Caesar all together. Um, and Ainsley, you're nodding along. You want to say something about Ave Caesar?
I really enjoyed Ave Caesar, partially because we played it all together, but also the mechanics were really fun. I feel like a lot of games that you play, like when you lose the game, it's because of your own fault sometimes. But I really liked Ave Caesar because it was more so just about what cards they're placing down and what movement it is, especially when they create like a tunnel point, you can't get past them and then they shoot ahead. So I really liked Ave
Oh
Caesar
yeah.
because I mean the win or loss was compelling regardless of the effect of the outcome, I should say.
Well, and y'all
Yeah.
screwed me out of the game after the first circuit, so that was pretty good too.
Yeah.
And this is a very basic race game where everybody has the same deck of cards. You shuffle it up. You have just enough, just a little more card points on the cards to get around the racetrack 3 times, and you have to do that. First person to do that wins. There's one little caveat that you have to go by this one little side slot to say Ave Caesar, and you throw a little plastic coin his way. And if somehow you cannot do that and you have to shoot past that on your second turn, on your second go round, then you're just out of the game, which my students made sure was in fact the case. So, but Ryan, yeah, made those choke points, and yeah, and got very lucky on his last card draws too, which was a lovely
Yeah.
tense moment.
Like I had the pretty much the perfect deck to finish the game. It was just more so like I needed to get to my turn so I could play the cards, and it just didn't turn out that way because Ryan went right before me, and every time I have a 6 card, so I'm gonna shoot ahead. He would make a choke point, and then I was done. I had to play one of my ones. Yeah, turn
Yep.
order gets you every time.
Well, that's it. You know, you bring up a really good point, because one of the things that we talk a lot about on this podcast is that my wife and I like to play games where you don't have to be mean to each other to win.
Ah, yes.
Wingspan is one of those games, for example. I'm curious though. I want to hear more about the dark side. I want to know, where did you guys see that in games, and were you the one more likely to be the mean one to win, or were there some others in the class? No names are necessary. That were more of that persona.
I know the game that if Evan were here, he'd definitely be yelling about. Silver,
Oh yeah.
specifically Amulet.
Oh yeah.
It's a game of bluffing and screwing your friends over in the best way possible. The goal is to get the least points on the cards in front of you, but they're all upside down, so you may or may not know what your cards are.
Right.
And it's really funny to switch a 4 or 3 with a 12. You have a 12 now. Congratulations.
Yeah, didn't want that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will fully admit that I was the cutthroat player,
Yeah.
and I wear that badge proudly. I not to brag, but I did win a lot of the games I played. But that's how I enjoy playing cutthroat because that's how I grew up playing with my family. Like we were all like going out against each other. We played Sorry a lot, which is a very cutthroat game if you make
It
it that
is.
way. So I just played that way as normal. One of the entries that another one of the students in the class made specifically called me out for my cutthroat. One of the games I could think of was It's a Small World.
Oh yeah.
I had this really excellent combination, the
Oh
orcs
yeah, you
and the
did.
pillaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just dominated the map. I really didn't care who I got out in the process, but that's how I enjoy board games.
My
Nice.
favorite moment in playing Small World with you was you did all of that. I switched to an entirely different. I switched to the Diplomatic Giants. That was the combo, and I said, "You're my friend." And the look on
You
your
can't
face was like,
attack me.
"God damn it!"
Yeah. Well, because you took my turned over dwarves and I was mad about that and I wanted to
Yeah,
get back at you,
yeah.
but
I was like,
the
"Oh."
giants and orcs had to be friends.
Yeah, that was a pretty good. That was a good moment because I could
Yes.
sense the rage in you.
Yeah. I just went
And
and took over somebody else's people
you
instead, so
did.
it was
Yeah.
fine.
You just sort of gobbled up the rest of the map. I think you won by like, I don't know, some god awful amount of points. Yeah.
Several points.
Yeah.
Several 5s of points.
Yeah, several
Yes.
fives of points indeed.
I feel like it's important to mention it was also my first time playing it, so
It was that I mean, for many of these games, it was their first time, it was y'all's first time playing. I mean, Silver got
Mhm.
played a lot. Um, it was interesting to watch Pina Parada start at the first half of the class and then kind of drop off as Silver kind of ascended. There were these two fairly fairly low key card games. Like you could easily, although I remember teaching Silver the first time and everybody looking at me with these blank faces, like, what the hell did you just say? There is no way that any of this makes sense. And then about 2 turns in, everybody's like, okay, I got this. And then by the end of the game, like, this is the best fucking game we've ever played. So yeah, and it kept coming out. And Pina Parada was like, it was okay when we didn't really know each other. And when we were content not to really have a strategy, there were a couple of metas. I remember something about octopus metas early on. Yeah. But that, yeah.
the octopuses acted as a wild card, but
Ah,
also when you put down the wild card, you had to like only put down octopus and then you could draw a card and put a wick. It was a whole bunch of rules stacked on top of each other, all involving the octopus. So that was a lot of fun to play. I would never say no to a game of Round of Pina Parada. I thought that game was so much fun.
It
It's
is.
interesting. I have a personal belief, and think James might agree with this. Playing games with people, I think number one, it kind of relaxes people sometimes, and it makes it easy
Mhm.
for people who don't always want to sit down together and have a good time. But also, I think it helps us learn a little bit about each other that we didn't expect. And I don't mean that in any philosophical way. It's just like you learn more about people's base behaviors in the way that they play a game. Did you observe anything like that as a part of this process?
There was an RPG we played called The Quiet Year, which was
Oh yeah.
my all-time favorite game out of the entire class. I could go into a 10-minute spiel about that, but I won't.
You
But
you did
the
for class. It was good.
I did. I did my final presentation on The Quiet Year, in which I did spend 10 minutes talking about it, probably
Yeah.
more. But what I found super interesting about the game was that at one point, me and the other two people who I were playing with, we kind of paused the game for a second. We talked about like how it was interesting to see how each person played the game based on what decisions they made on their turn. They draw the card. Do they pick the option that's more compelling, but it's poor consequences, or one that's more about finishing projects? Do they start projects? Do they discover something new? So it was really interesting to see in how The Quiet Year, how people differentiate the game when they play and how they approach the different mechanics, which I thought was really interesting with that because I'm a normally very cutthroat player, as I've previously mentioned, but I feel like when I played The Quiet Year, I was very uh, wanting to expand the community and make it better, except for the one part where I introduced the priest Bob, if you remember, or Father
Oh yeah.
Bob.
Oh yeah. I remember Father Bob. Yeah. Well, the card asked you to add an interesting person, and yeah, which was good.
Yes.
Katie, how about you? Do you have anything to add there?
I wish I'd played the Quiet Year. I wasn't super into it. Like it sounded. I prefer RPGs that are more like combat oriented than solve a community problem oriented. But reflecting on it over the past week or so, it's been like a week since class ended.
Yeah.
I wish I had played it. It's on my list of games I wish I had played.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, it's always interesting how a game can surprise you in terms of what do you think it's going to be like. I know, James, we were not going to really get into what we have on our table, but my wife and I have been playing Foundations of Rome for the
Oh,
last week or so. And our initial response, because it was such a big box with all these complex pieces, we thought it was going to be a very heavy game. It's not.
no.
It's like Carcassonne, not. And so we've,
But it's pretty.
yeah,
It's
it's
big and
great.
pretty.
Yeah, we've enjoyed playing it, but it's just really interesting when you and James and I talk a lot about um, your gaming vocabulary or
Literacy,
your
yeah.
gaming intelligence, like emotional intelligence. I call it gaming intelligence, where the more games you learn, we get into games, you uh adapt to them much more quickly because you kind of know what the icons mean or you know how to interpret them. And I'm just kind of curious, in the 3 weeks, did you find that you found yourself a little bit more game savvy in that regard?
Absolutely. They were definitely games that I was like, oh, this is like this other game. And then the mechanic didn't even need to be explained. It was just I knew what was going on, which was really nice towards the end of it. In the beginning, there were a lot of new things to learn.
So can you think of I mean, I'm thinking of Living Forest. But were there
Yes.
other ones? Ah, okay. So there was stuff in Living Forest that seemed
Um,
familiar.
yes, and then now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember what the things that were familiar were. Um,
Well, well,
Part
we
of
were
Living
buying cards
Forest
from
was
a
interesting
yeah, go
about
ahead.
it was the same as Wingspan. And also part of it was the same as Point City, maybe? I
Yep.
don't know.
Right,
But
because
it
you were
was,
buying cards from that middle display. Yeah.
yeah, to have the cards you want to give you points later, not necessarily for now. Oh, it was like the Tea Dragon Society.
Oh yeah,
That was closer than Point City.
that makes sense. Right, because you're laying out your whole tableau in one sort of off to the side as opposed to yeah.
Yeah. And then once it's laid down, you can't play again until the following turn. Like that is that card's chance. And when you buy it, it goes, you can't play it immediately. It doesn't go to your hand, it goes to the table.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. We had the trying to think of other stuff that might have been familiar from other games that we had played. There was the Push Your Luck. Um that's in a variety of different spaces. Uh there was also the kind of collective, we have to take care of this fire together or it's going to come
Mhm.
back at us kind of thing. So
The dice rolling game that you brought in towards the last day, or second to last day,
yes. Tumbling dice. Yep.
do you push hard enough that it could go off the board entirely, or do you
Yep.
not push hard enough that you get a 0? So
That was fun. And that was one,
yes.
that was a collective hit. That was super fun to watch everybody like, wait, what is this? And that was so Joe, do you know Tumbling Dice?
I do not.
Okay. So it's got what, 3 or 4 tiers, probably 4 tiers, and a sort of launch pad at the top, and you are taking a D6 and sort of flicking or sliding it off. The farther down you go, the more points you're going to multiply by whatever the pips are on the die facing up, right?
Mhm.
So the best thing is way at the bottom where these little squares are a 4-time multiplier, but the chances of you rolling off the board super high. And then you can, of course, it has kind of a shuffleboard thing where you can knock other people off and out of scoring, and these people could not stop.
It was a good game for between games, like when someone would be setting up a new game, then or cleaning up an old game, then you could just pop over and play around.
Or 4 or 5.
Or
This
6.
is a great game just to play. Like, I don't need to be playing any other games. This game alone was great.
Well, and we hadn't played any, and it occurred to me as, again, like I said at the last couple of days of class, it was like, oh, I didn't bring any dexterity games. Let's try this one. Yeah, and then there was no stopping it.
So
Another set of games that were similar, Carcassonne and Betrayal at Baldur's Gate. It's the same map building game.
And Trellis had a kind of app.
Yes,
part
and
of that
Trellis
too. Yeah.
okay, interesting. I hadn't really thought about Carcassonne and any of the
Betrayal. Yeah.
trail games, because I don't have the Baldur's Gate, but I have the original, and we have the Scooby Doo.
Damn it. You meddling kid.
No, right? But yeah, I guess it does kind of have that vibe. I never really thought about that from that perspective. So
Well, say more, Katie. What was it that was striking you as that?
Laying tiles out. You can choose which direction you go, but in this way, it's actually very opposite of you have to choose a direction before you pull your tile versus pulling a tile based off of, or placing the tile based off of what tile you have. So a little bit of, if you're going inside to inside, you got to pull in a building card, not a street card. But you didn't know if there were going to be good things or bad things or omens or points. Not really points, but the cards that give you fun items. I guess just item cards.
Feels like points. Yeah.
Betrayal was a hit for both Ori and Ainsley, and I got sucked in, and I had a lot of fun. But also, I kind of wanted to be the bad guy once, and Ainsley just kept getting it.
It was a showdown between you and Ori. Yeah. So how did that go?
Well, we played it, I think, twice, two times, 2 or 3 times. And every single time I was the traitor because that's, just my luck. And me and Ori, the other player that we were playing with, we were the only ones drawing omen cards. And, they had the same thing with I always the traitor. So it was fun to see who was going to be the traitor, whose luck was worse. It was mine. But yeah, so I was the traitor every single time. But it was okay. I really liked Betrayal. It was, I think, because I played Betrayal before the class. That was one of the games that I own. I own the expansion pack. I play it all the time.
Awesome.
So I was very experienced with that game. So it was a lot of fun to be the traitor, actually, but it's also fun to be the player. Don't know how that feels, though.
Well, given the high volume of Furman faculty that listen to this podcast on a regular basis, not to mention the Furman alumni that'll listen to this on a regular basis, let's pivot away for the games for a second. I know that there was actually some reading that you had to do because it was a up class. Talk a little bit about number one, were you surprised there was reading when you signed up? I think I would be. And, we don't need to get deep in the weeds on what the readings were, but I was just kind of curious. Did you feel like that they enhanced the experience of the class? This is not ratemyprofessor.com. Just be honest and candid.
It's an English-based class, so I was expecting reading of some kind. I was expecting more writing than just the daily discussion posts, which I will never say no to less writing.
Yeah.
I am a psychology girl, so writing is not my strongest suit, but I have to do a lot of it. So I guess I shouldn't complain about more practice.
Yeah, don't feel too bad. I'm a writing major and I didn't want to write, so
good. The readings literally ranged from emotional intelligence to how to teach a game to why narrative is important. Like, we talked about everything that could even vaguely be related to games.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Because I've said this before on the podcast, one of my favorite examples is from the Big Bang Theory, where Penny is trying to teach Sheldon about improv, and she says improv is all about saying yes, and that's the way I feel about RPGs, particularly because I'm the dungeon master or the game master a lot of times, and I feel like it's all about saying yes to whatever your players want to try, because I don't have to give them the permission. The dice does that. I just have to figure out how to tell the story from that point forward. And, that's what I love about it. It's that collective storytelling, that collective experience. I know that's more of an RPG thing, but I think that, kind of delving into that a little bit, as a setup makes a lot of sense. Cause I think, and I'm curious what you guys think about this as well, because I think there's a lot that games can teach us the way we deal with each other in life, whether it's our workspace or our family space or what have you. And I'm just kind of curious, did that resonate at all with either the readings or the games or anything like that with you guys?
Yes,
You're allowed to disagree with me, by the way.
it does. I
My
think both
PhD
of
is a
us,
post hole digger, and I use it to dig holes.
both of us are RPG mainly historically.
Oh yeah.
Like, as the treasurer of the Dungeons and Dragons Club, you don't get that without being part of the Dungeons and Dragons Club
Fair.
to a high extent. I was the secretary for the past 2 years, so I had a lot of writing to do between each club meeting, and some of that included prep for Dungeon Masters. So if there was a one shot that week, I'd give them the material so they don't have to worry about it. So they're being kind enough to run it. So
See, we needed her for our campaign.
Oh yeah.
Would have saved me a ton of time.
Well, and I think, just to go back to the readings a second, there wasn't a lot of mathing,
Yeah.
not a lot of strategy, but there was a lot of, what are the narratives that we can tell? What are all these other things? And just really skittering across the surface, which is what I hope came across, is that there was so much more to do.
a little bit of everything.
Yeah, a little bit
And
of
then we
everything.
could dive into whatever we were interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the most compelling reading was one of the first ones that we did, where we
Ah.
talked about like what the different types of fun are. Because like we did at the beginning of the course, so the entire time I'm playing different games, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is, this kind of fun is sensation, or it's challenging, or any of the other ones, fantasy, and the other 7 of them I can't remember.
Yeah.
But that was really interesting to like have the reading very early on, and then like go through the class, be like, oh my gosh,
Good.
like this is real, like this reading was so right. I found very quickly that I really enjoy sensation games, actually, because I like rolling dice, and I like drawing pictures, and I like holding tiny rocks in Century Golem edition.
Oh yeah.
So that was something I learned about myself, and I wouldn't have known without the readings. So
Well, and this is
I'm
what's interesting
all ready.
about these kinds of readings too, right? You're like, oh, somebody has thought about stuff that now that they mention, I'm like, oh shit, this is like core to my experience. This is you weren't the only one, right? I think a lot of people talked about what kind of fun they were having as they went along. That, and then I also noticed a couple of people saying, oh, wait, I'm gonna teach this game differently now after we've done the how to teach a game sequence. It was kind of fun, but it was like, okay, wait, let me think about. And I thought, if that's a gift I can give to everybody else who y'all are gonna like interact with in the future, that was something that was important.
Yeah, like doing that whole unit where we talked about how to teach games. Like, I consider myself a pretty okay teacher of games because I've taught Dungeons and Dragons to like
Sure.
20 people at this point. But it was just I found a new perspective in how to teach games and do it in a way that makes sense when I explain it, and also when other people perceive what I'm telling. Because you explain a game, and I'm sure you all have experience with this, half the stuff someone tells you just goes out the other ear, and you don't really know until you start playing. So it was interesting to be able to learn exactly what's important and how I should say it in order to convey my points in a way that makes sense and that they'll remember. Again, I wouldn't have been able to figure that out or read about that without the readings. So
It's an interesting moment too, where you think, okay, what can I skip and what is absolutely important for the first couple of rounds so that we can get going. And then I'll say, oh, remember when I said this card is going to come up or these things are going to happen? Now is when that happens. And let's look at those. And a teaching game is weird that way. And I think I can't remember, one of you or somebody else was writing about losing badly a teaching game just because like I was spending so much time paying attention to what everybody else was doing. I just played badly. I was like, yeah, that's generally how that goes.
You know,
I
and
know
I think that's
everyone talked.
Please
Go ahead.
Please go ahead. Y'all are the guests. I'm just, here.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with that idea of, playing a game and teaching it to somebody and then losing as you play it, because I think another one of the readings talked about when you play a game or when you teach somebody how to play a game, if you win, it kind of sucks the joy out of it for them because yeah, you won or whatever. So like, I'm not going to play again. So I totally agree with like your first time, you're so focused on how making sure other people have fun and learn the game that you just totally like ignore what you're doing. Like, for example, Splendor, I taught it to some friends after the class was over. I lost horribly. I got like 3 points or something crazy like that. But my friends had fun and now they're like, this game's awesome. Ainsley, like, we gotta keep playing it. And I'm like,
Yes.
my job's done. Like, I get to play Splendor more. So
Yep.
So
And
I
Katie,
find
you had something else you wanted to say too.
go ahead.
Okay.
It went out.
I was just gonna say, my experience is like, I tell you, I show you, and then I let you. And it's all about the game. And I'm the same way. I'm very much like when I teach Wingspan, I actually show my cards and I explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Because I find that on some of these games that have 4 rounds, if you can get them to at least go through 2 rounds, by the 3rd round, it's clicked. And then you can play again and it's a much different experience once it's clicked in. But it's got to be that hearing you explain what it is, letting me see what it is, and then that tactile experience of doing it really, really is a big part of any of those games, honestly, from my point of view. So
Going back to the readings a little bit, I also had the "What kind of fun are you having?" article pulled up. Like, he sent us a list of questions, so I said, let's prep. Let's pretend we know what's going on.
Awesome.
So that one and the Homek.
Homek, yeah.
I'm definitely mispronouncing that.
No worries.
Both of those chapters were good. Is also the psychology aspect of why games are important, especially as little children who are learning emotional regulation, and the importance of not being a sore loser, which some of them don't necessarily learn, but they'll learn it eventually. So it's better to start in games than in real life. So those are really cool to me.
Yeah, I really like you. Yeah, right. Because I remember we had a couple of psych papers that we read that you were like, oh yeah. And the Promic is really nice for that early ed kind of, here's how you think about all of those things. And I don't know if they talked about it in that paper, but there's other places where they talk about being a good winner as well is almost even more important. Like how not to be a dick and dance on the graves of your enemies, is
still enjoy that you won, but don't rub it in so that other people never want to play again.
I don't know if James told you, last year we interviewed Dr. Megan Cannell, and she wrote a book called Tabletop Role-Playing Therapy. She is a clinical psychologist here in Charlotte, and she has a YouTube channel called Geeks Like Us.
I see Katie writing it down.
Where she played a D&D game with a bunch of other clinical psychologists. They call it Clinical Role, and they're quite fun to watch. Anyway, we had her on, and she actually uses tabletop role-play therapy in her group therapies with youth and young people
and veterans. That was her other population. Yep, because she's a veteran.
Yep, that's exactly right. So she's a neat lady, and it's a Norton book, so it's written for the academics, but she wrote it also for the layperson. So it's a really cool get.
Really accessible.
And she lives right down the road. We've played games with her. She's great.
Which is awesome. I still haven't. Joe taunts me with this kind of stuff all the time, but I hope the next time I'm in Charlotte, we'll get a chance to do that. So one of the things because both of y'all are RPG sword maidens. So thank you. So we had a week of playing some wacky RPGs that were well off the beaten path. I know Joe has a soft spot for some wacky RPGs that are a little bit off the beaten path. It's the Girl Scout one that you always want to keep.
Yeah, Badge Quest. Badge Quest by DM Dave. It's like Scooby-Doo meets Girl Scouts for D&D. It's awesome.
So we talked about the Quiet Year for a little bit, which is a fantastic, just big picture storytelling game. Were there other ones? I mean, I'm thinking about Raccoon Sky Pirates. I'm thinking about
Kobolds
Kobolds.
ate my baby.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Um, an interesting experience I had was I was kind of tired of RPGs by the second or third day.
Fair.
I'm used to playing one character. I play in multiple campaigns, so 4 characters at once, but all generally the same mechanics. And then you threw 14 different types of games that are still RPGs at us. So there was a lot more thinking than I'm used to for D&D. Like D&D is intuitive at this point. I've watched so
Sure.
much content about it and I've played it a lot. I put in an ungodly amount of hours into it. So it was stepping outside of my comfort zone, but keeping the things about D&D that I love. So it was really cool, but
Yeah.
kind of exhausting.
Were there, I mean, besides Kobolds, were there highlights, or was Kobolds a highlight?
Kobolds, I think, was my biggest highlight because it was very role-playing oriented versus D&D is you have to know your character. Kobolds, your character's going to die in 5 minutes. It doesn't really matter if you know your character.
Your character didn't die, it just turned blue.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I don't know
So I'm
either.
now a blue kobold.
Probably shunned.
I have my character sheet somewhere around
Oh,
here.
that's awesome.
It's saying I keep all my character sheets so I can remember. And the princess and Perils and Princesses that
Yep.
Ori brought, that was so cool. Because Ori's presentation, first of all, was phenomenal. They
Mhm.
made it look very good and very easy to play. When we were actually playing, I was like, how does this work? How does this work? I didn't give them a chance to explain. I just said, how does this work? It was also the first RPG outside of D&D I'd played, like in that session. So
Well, and I think it's interesting the way that when you sit down to play a board game, you're thinking, okay, here are all the pieces and how do I manipulate them? And when you sit down with a new RPG, you're like, where do I even start, right? Like I've got a character sheet. How do I even go from that?
You meet in a tavern. Oh, wait, sorry.
That way we always met. Except for Perils and Princesses, we met at did we just meet at the tree or did we
Yeah,
I
we
can't
just
remember.
met in the forest. We were just all
Yeah.
frolicking and found each other.
Yeah, because we're princesses.
Yeah.
That's how it worked.
That tracks.
Yeah. And Ainsley, you got a chance to be the first time being sort of the DM or GM of your own RPG.
your game was also very cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I've been developing a TTRPG. It's a horror TTRPG called We Dread Alone. I've been working on it with Dr. Englehart, and I got to run a one shot for it. Um, during the class, Katie was in it and a couple of other students as well. And it was my first time actually getting to really run the game because I've been working on on developing it, organizing the playtesting and all that. So I've never actually really gotten to enjoy and experience my own game. So that was actually a lot of fun to like sit down and be like, I'm gonna create a story for this and like people experience it with me and it's fun and yeah, so that was a lot of fun to get to play my own game because at the core of me making my game is making something that I find to be fun and want to experience with other people. So I would definitely say that was a highlight of the class for me just because there's something special about creating something and then having other people engage with it. That
So-
was easily one of the better days.
So I have a sidebar question for you specifically, Ainsley, is so you're creating this TTRPG. Are you doing it? Are you using like Word or Pages, or are you using something like World Anvil? Are you using something like Obsidian? What is your repository to build this in?
So I'm planning everything out in Notion and just like writing out all my ideas, and then I've been compiling everything into actually Canva. The rule books, a pre-made story that I'm making with it, the Weaver's Guide, the Weaver being the dungeon master of the game. And so I'm doing everything in Canva, which was easier for me at first because I knew Canva really well.
Sure.
It's a lot of stuff now, so I should probably look into a different kind of software to use to actually make the game with. But
Notion is not
Canva is my
bad.
best
Notion is
friend.
not bad. If you know who
Mhm.
Sly Flourish, the lazy dungeon master, he's got a great YouTube channel, and on there he talks about how to use things like Notion and Obsidian and game prep and stuff. And there's some really good content out there that will help you not have to reinvent the wheel. Because if you already know Notion,
Yep.
I stick with Notion.
I plan all of my Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, all of my one shots in Notion, so I'm very familiar with that too. Yeah,
The
my
show
one shot I
notes
planned for
are
the class.
Yeah,
our show notes are in Notion. So Joe's the
Mhm.
keeper of the Notions.
and
Yeah.
all of my campaigns are in Notion. Although I have been looking at Obsidian just because of a Sly Flourish thing, and I can self-host it. But that's just me being a nerd, as James will tell
Yeah,
you
I
what
love Notion.
I have to do. But
Yeah.
Anyway,
All the IT stuff. It's all him.
yeah.
And you, so another fun part of the class, and we're just gonna lean on Ainsley here again for a second, was having Ellie Amir, and they were, I guess, for an hour-ish, talking. I was hoping to have Evan because there was a whole lot of businessy stuff, and it kind of sent Evan off into a whole different space, which was kind of fun to watch. But and I think there was maybe some connections that were made for you, Ainsley, and like thinking more about the next steps with the RPG.
Yeah, because I'm getting close to the end of like my initial playtesting with a couple of my groups, so I'm really looking to start expand, looking into, creating artwork for the game, reaching out to people to see how I can kind of further take the game, because I guess there's only so much I can do in terms of, developing it. So it was really cool for Ellie Muir to come and talk to me about that, like talk about how their Kickstarter worked, how that all came down, like what are the necessary things that you need to develop the game. Like I totally didn't know about with Kickstarter, like you need to basically have a finished product before you start advertising it on there. And I thought I was ready for the next step. So I have a couple more things that I need to do now before I start to get on Kickstarter. And then of course I also made that connection through Eliamir with JP, I believe.
Mhm.
So that was really cool too. Eliamir was definitely another highlight of the class for me. Again, I love RPGs and everything involving that. So
Well, it's interesting when James and I had the opportunity to speak with Jamie Stegmeyer last year of Stonemeyer Games, we were talking about Wingspan, and he said when he first found Wingspan, it was just a card game,
Oh yeah,
not the product that you see today, and all the playtesting and how he worked with, Elizabeth and brought in the artists like Natalie and Beth to kind of help expand it out and really, make more out of it. So I think the more you can get that collaboration going, because honestly, you know, independent game design these days, I think, is probably the best outlet for independent artists, whether you're a writer, an artist, visual artist, what have you, that's still available. And AI just can't touch it.
right. And I'm a writing major at Furman, so I totally understand the whole outlet for writing because, like, I love to write. I'm a big short story writer, but I definitely find that
sorry, Katie.
I hone in my writing the most through my game and when I play other RPGs because I'm a forever DM and I proudly admit that I love to DM.
Don't
The
you
number
hate
of
people like
players
that?
like
That never want to be the player, that are always going to be the DM.
God love you, you
Blair.
people.
I can count the number of characters I've actually played before on one hand in terms of player characters, but
Play them all. You play them all.
yeah. Um, but yeah, so I just love telling the narratives, and I think that, in making my game and being the DM, I really get to do that. And that's the joy that I find in RPGs is creating the narrative of the game. And so the role that I, fill as DM, as developer, it kind of flows very naturally with that.
Awesome.
Well, the last thing we'll say on this, or at least I'll say on it, is I know James introduced you to the one individual that has done the Kickstarter. We have another friend who was taught writing at Winthrop University,
Oh yeah.
and she is best known on RPG Drive Through as Christina Styles Presents. Christina Styles, she's a publisher in the RPG world, and she's actually helping a Kickstarter across the finish line right now. Last time I saw her,
Oh, cool.
yeah, somebody started one and then they had some medical issues, and so she's helping them get it to the finish line. So that might be another good resource at some point.
Yeah.
To think about. Anyway, so I know we're kind of coming up on time, so I'm curious about a couple things.
He always is, y'all.
I know it's the things, and we're gonna pick on Katie here for a second. So Katie, you're a junior. You have one more year at Furman, and
Yep.
I'm curious if you roll around and it's graduation time and there's a Mayax and there's like games part G. Is that something that you would do again?
I already know I'm doing a fourth Mayax.
Oh,
I'm doing
cool.
one every year at Furman. Our
Oh,
spring
yay.
tuition pays for Max
It
tuition, so
does.
I am wasting money if I don't.
See,
It's fair. Well,
At
and you're in
Wofford- at
Greenville,
Wofford
so
we did
yeah,
it- At Wofford, we did it in January and we called it interim.
we did.
It was in between the semesters.
And
The other really cool thing about the Maxes at Furman are you get to take a class on something you would never otherwise look at. Last year I took a knitting and crochet Max.
oh, yay.
I already knit and
Yeah.
crochet, but it was really cool to be kind of the teacher in it. Like I was there to help rather than learn. But we also learned about the history, and
Yes.
that was completely new to me. And now the literature side of games also completely new to me, and I have so many new favorite games.
Awesome.
And then the computer science one was just like, it's a board game class. Why not? Its name was Who Sunk My Battleship?
Which
Board
is
game
awesome.
analysis.
Great game. Yeah,
So
a
it
great
was
title, yeah.
enticing.
Awesome.
I'm glad. And the woman who taught the knitting was the director of the writing and media lab, right?
Mhm.
Yep, she's fantastic. And she talked about like how amazing it was that y'all would like, no, we're just gonna sit here and keep knitting. So
Yep.
that was super fun.
And we've kept each other up to date on our projects. So it's like
That's awesome.
you build a community at Furman through
Yeah.
your classes and you with your teachers. And I know we have a MAX Discord at this point of just the people in our class, and we will probably keep playing games together.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is
And
awesome.
Yeah, I'd
again,
love
there will
to.
be a bunch of them living in my office, so you know.
Yes.
And
Compete
you know,
for the
and
games.
to Katie's point, it's the same on the professor's side too, right? You get to do something that, you know, there's no way that I'm just teaching a games class in the semester. Like it just doesn't work. I
I
mean,
mean,
the
you
writing,
kind of do a little
well,
bit.
yeah, the FYW has a little bit, but like Ryan, who was like, "Hey, I was in your FYW," I'm like, "Yeah, we're gonna do like so much less writing and so much more games playing," and he was pretty stoked. And he's working tonight, otherwise he'd be here because I thought that the contrast of his perspective would be helpful. But yeah, so hence a lot less writing. Katie, you're down to my left as I'm, you know, so I'm gesturing this way because it's like we're on Hollywood Squares to give a way deep throwback.
I got
Yeah,
it.
so yeah, thank you. But I would expect.
Yes.
So, but yeah, it's a chance to do, right? Because the director of the writing and media labs isn't going to teach a class on knitting. There's the fly fishing class. There's, you know, there was a class by a guy in the sciences who was teaching the Beatles. You know, there's just these
There was also
wonderful.
a class on barbecue.
Oh yes, there was,
Yes.
and everybody got to
So-
go out and eat barbecue all the
Yeah.
time. So yeah.
There was a lot of
Yeah.
fighting.
That's just an amazing class. There were a lot of really good options this year.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Max that went to Italy that just went to eat food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to
Bastards.
spend 3 weeks in Italy eating food and get school credit?
It is fair.
I guess we did because we decided to stay in
We
Greenville
chose
for
both
board
board
games.
But
So-
then who wouldn't want to do that? Apparently a bunch of people, but I thought it was an awesome choice and I was grateful to hang out with y'all for the month of May. So
So I have a couple of listener questions here that I want to ask you, ladies. And the listeners really want to know about Dr. Englehart. I mean, do people take his classes because they hear, oh, we'll just play games? I mean, is that his reputation? He's kind of laid back and he's the professor that's the class everybody wants? I'm lying.
I had never heard. I've never heard of you before this game,
that's cool.
this
Yeah,
class.
no,
but
it's fair.
here we are.
Here we
a lot of fun.
There are no listener
Yeah.
questions. That was just me being.
That was just I
You are the listener.
Joe is the listener. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I only met Dr. Englehart in last November, so I didn't really
Yeah.
know you that well. I had never taken a class with you, so but I will gladly take up the chance to go play some board games, regardless of who teaches it. So
It's fair.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Well, listen, ladies, I really appreciate you taking the time away from, you know, you just got done with school. You're probably ready to decompress, and here you're being asked to come on a podcast. So we really appreciate you coming on
To
and
talk about school again. Yeah.
sharing your experience and sharing your stories with us. And I just wish you both tremendous success in whatever you're going for next, whether it's your senior year or your pursuits academically or your pursuits professionally. And we just appreciate it. And of course, Tell people about our podcast. You know, it helps. We don't do this for the money. We do it for the passion for the hobby. So there is no money.
There are no sponsors.
Yes, there are no sponsors, which means we
Thanks
can
for
say whatever
having
we want.
us.
Yeah,
Oh,
you're very
yeah.
welcome. All right.
Yeah, this was an
So-
awesome opportunity.
Oh, great.
So with that, we will be back in a few weeks with another episode of Lay It on the Table. As per usual, I am Joe Mahaffey. I am not bored. I am board gaming.
And I'm James Engelhart, and I hope that all your tiebreakers break your way.
Thank you, and we will see you in a couple of weeks.
See ya.